Peter Thiel is not shy about saying that he thinks the restaurant business, and many investors think it's an awful business to get into.
Theory right now that there's a company called Sysco who's a supplier to the restaurants, and that they have a vast monopoly over restaurant supply chain. That is causing a decline in the restaurant market in itself, just because there's no competition. So it's a prime market to be disrupted. Enigma of Five Guys is that they have survived and even thrived while not maximizing in the same way that their competitors have. Alexander was cultivating a culture of warriors. Five Guys wants to cultivate the right type of employee at their location to carry out the dedication to the quality of the product. How do you, as a business strategist, recommend to leadership that they locate that employee that fits their brand or their vision or their corporate environment?
The other would be, what could kill Sysco is if Five Guys type models expand, where this locally sourced, never frozen becomes a cultural behavior change.
Before we begin, I'd like to take just a moment of your time to ask you to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you enjoy the podcast. Michael and I have big plans for this podcast, including guests and even some fun field trips that will take you to some behind-the-scenes places in the future. But in order for us to get there, we need to grow the channel first. So please, it helps us so much more than you would know to please like, subscribe, and share the video. Welcome to Show Your Priors, Episode 3. I am your co-host, Jason Thompson, along with Michael Nichols, here for another week of business and strategy discussion. We have some interesting topics today. We have Alexander the Great, and we have Five Guys, and we might get into some other stuff too if we have time, depending on how that goes. So I don't want to give too much away, but Mike, why don't you get us started? I think our first topic is going to be Five Guys.
Yeah, let's get into Five Guys. We had a listener ask us to do a segment on Five Guys, and one of the reasons is, when I talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, I don't think food comes to the top of people's minds.
Yeah.
And there's this quote, or at least it's been rumored, that Peter Thiel is not shy about saying that he thinks the restaurant business, and many investors think it's an awful business to get into.
Yeah.
And why? Well, margins are low. It's hard to secure labor that's going to stay there. High labor turnover. It's hard to get loyal workers, get truancy. Competition is brutal. It's a taste game, right? It's a cultural fad game, and that's just hard to win in. And you have to have good sourcing, distribution. I'm sure you'll get into all that. So I just hand it back over to you and tell us why Five Guys is kind of like a dark horse out there, a Cinderella story.
Yeah.
And it probably shouldn't have succeeded. So what did you find out when you were looking into it?
Yeah, so I kind of looked into Five Guys and saw that I looked into Five Guys and saw that they've been around for 40 years. They've got almost 2,000 locations. I think it's 1,700, something like that. They're in about 7 to 8 countries. I had trouble finding the exact number, but they're in a good number of locations now. So they've really expanded over the years. They were started by a family of a father and 4 kids, 5 guys, and then later had a 6th kid. So there's really 6 guys, but still 5 guys. Anyways, that's how they started. And it was a family business. They did really well. The unique things about them, they have a couple unique things. So nothing is ever frozen. So that's a really hard thing to achieve in this day and age with this industry. So nothing's ever frozen. Everything's fresh. And then they don't do traditional advertising. So I also want to talk about that a little bit at the ending, but we'll put a pin in the advertising thing for right now. But they haven't done traditional advertising. So over the years, they have grown primarily by word of mouth. They started in Arlington, Virginia. You and I actually, when we were in Washington, D.C., we actually went to that first location. It's much bigger now than it was when it started. I think this is probably a picture of it here on the screen. But
it's not a bad place. Well, on the one hand, it's a bad place to start a business in Arlington around DC because there's so much good food.
Yeah.
If you've ever been to DC, right? I mean, I think anybody who goes there and comes back is like, those congressmen and congresswomen are getting the best food in the world. Yeah. You have all those ethnicities, right, descending upon DC. So on the one hand, if you survive there, right, it's good. But on the other hand, it's a brutal game to try to play in.
Yeah, for sure. But that's where I think they maybe struck something of genius because they wanted to focus solely on the quality. Like that's what they wanted. Their advertising was probably a smell wafting out the door, getting people to come in. And the way that they did that was with specific instructions to their employees as how do they cook the burgers, specific instruction on how they cook the fries. One thing that I know that they do that, let's say McDonald's doesn't. McDonald's uses a canola oil because it's less expensive, is the thought behind that anyways. But they use a canola oil, as do most restaurants to cook their fries, whereas Five Guys uses a peanut oil. So, and they use peanut oil and salt, according to them. I think maybe one other ingredient, but there's very low ingredients where other companies may have many. I watched the CEO talk to Stephen Bartlett on Diary of a CEO in preparation for this and kind of heard some of that type of thing, which in my opinion is advertising. So we'll come back to that. So that's how they that was their business model on the onset, was to just make the best product we can, keep the menu simple. They don't have a lot of varying items on their menu. It's burgers, fries. Now you have a lot of toppings on those burgers, so you can get, they say 200,000 whatever combinations of toppings, but it's still very simple as far as the cooked items. So it was a very focused approach. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something interesting about that I've noticed. I don't know if you've noticed it, that when the menu is simple, we talked about in one of the first two episodes how Yahoo versus Google, right? Yahoo literally did everything.
Yeah.
And then Google did this one search box. And Yahoo's site, I mean, if you look at it, it was overwhelming when you finally see that Google thing. And I compare Five Guys to the Cheesecake Factory. When you go in the Cheesecake Factory, you look at the menu, it's like reading a Tolstoy novel.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's overwhelming. Like, what do I even choose? Now, you need to go there several times just to find a dish that suits you. But you have a high risk of messing it up, right, when you order. So I think there's like this bias, or maybe it's even a well-deserved bias, that if a company has a simple menu and there's a bias that they must do it well, right? Like, hey, they only do burgers and fries. They got to be like geniuses at that.
Yeah.
Maybe don't try the hot dogs, but it's an interesting thing I've noticed. I don't know if you've noticed that, if you have that same impression.
Yeah, no, it's I completely agree with the Cheesecake Factory. I go there occasionally. We'll go there maybe once or twice a year, something like that. It's expensive. I don't know. Anyways, but yes, I feel a little bit overwhelmed. And because I don't go there all the time, I haven't tried everything. I don't think I will ever try everything. I'll ask the waiter or waitress what their suggestion is, probably something like that. But yeah, I'm absolutely missing out on some great items that I don't know are the best. So if you go into something that's very specific, like a Five Guys, I know exactly what I'm going to get. I know it's going to be fantastic, and I don't have to worry about that. So it's a really good way to look at that. Really, what the kind of thing that surprises me about Five Guys and the way they grew was, they have a CEO today. I think they're a publicly traded company. Don't quote me on that. But they grew. So the father and the sons, they were very strict about what they wanted for their business. And they had to cave on a couple things. So especially around COVID, they had to finally give in on delivery. There was a story about the Pentagon requesting a delivery from Five Guys at one point in time when they were, first growing. And Five Guys told them, no, we don't deliver. Why? Well, because they want the food to be fresh. They want it as good as it can be, as fresh as it can be. And if it gets delivered, that is now tainted or diminished.
It's out of their hands.
Yeah, exactly. So they have had to make some concessions, with COVID to stay alive. If you didn't go in delivery, they probably wouldn't be open right now. So they have had to make concessions, and they say that they've made some good partnerships, whatever. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking they're probably,
you know what I find fascinating about this? So run it back, and Five Guys is absolutely blown up.
Yeah.
It's not a business, if you look back, that you'd say, if you asked a marketer or a consultant, they'd say that this business is going to blow up. Imagine coming and pitching to a VC, hey, I got this great idea. I'm going to start a burger place.
Right.
In America, right? Like, the VC is going to look at you like, you're insane. Why would you do that?
You want to go against
right?
McDonald's?
We have McDonald's.
Yeah,
we have McDonald's. We got Burger King, Wendy's. There's no place for this. Like, oh, no. We're going to do burgers. We're going to charge more.
Yeah. You're going to have a drive-through? No drive-through. Foot traffic only. Oh, and their first location, by the way, had no seating. It was just come in and get your food and go.
Well, and even that local sourcing thing, they must be doing local sourcing. I'm just guessing.
Yes, they are.
how do you scale that thing, right? How are
Hmm.
you getting efficiency? That sounds expensive just
Right.
by nature. Like you're not dealing with the big distributors and getting discounts on bulk. So yeah, it's a business where if you looked at the fundamentals, you'd say, this is awful.
Yeah.
Right? Why would you ever do this? And
Yeah.
yet here we are.
So I watched a video last night on from the Plain Bagel. I don't know if you've ever watched his channel, but he's a business YouTuber essentially, kind of economy, that kind of stuff. But his the title of his video is Five Guys Actually More Expensive. So he went down to the calorie level, to the grams of beef level, and
Mm,
on some things they're actually on their just regular burger, they're actually less expensive per calorie or per grams of beef than McDonald's. Now you get into the
mm,
cheeseburger, the bacon cheeseburger, whatever, they were actually coming in more expensive. But you should expect that because of the supply chain that they have intact here to get you a better product, is just, to me, the fact that they can even get it where it's close is kind of mind blowing because
yeah.
I don't know if I said this before because we were talking about this before we started recording, but they do not freeze anything. So in
Mm,
order to make that happen, everything has to be local source. They have to have butchers that are nearby enough so that the refrigeration truck can get it there within an X amount of time. There's another company with this business model, and that is In-N-Out Burger on the West Coast. So they have the same kind of
yeah.
thing. They didn't expand as fast as they probably could have because they have very specific regulations around their distribution chains because I believe they also don't freeze. So they have to have locally sourced beef. They have to have locally sourced potatoes, that kind of thing. Potatoes probably a little bit more leeway there.
Well, to be fair, we're comparing Five Guys and McDonald's, and it's not clear they're actually in the same
Yeah, I would say they weren't.
category.
Yeah.
So you'd say like McDonald's is very casual, and then Five Guys is what they might call fast casual, like a little bit above it.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm getting the terminology wrong, but
No, you're right.
it's kind of based on the pricing. And then like fast and then fast casual, right? So casual then would be above. There, that's the right terminology.
I believe
Fast,
so.
fast casual, casual, right?
Hmm.
And then it used to be like Chipotle would be in that same range, right? Where you
Yeah.
kind of it's
Chipotle's fast
fast, but you
casual.
sit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fast casual, right? And
Yeah.
Five Guys is kind of seen as the same way. So it's not exactly fair to say that they're positioning exactly the same way. And those elements that you're mentioning, like locally sourced, fresh food, never frozen, those would lend themselves, at least you would expect, to higher prices because there will be a segment out there that attaches value to those things, right? Like locally sourced, we use local farmers. I mean, look at the local farmers markets and how much they charge, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but people value that, and they always have actually.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially today, one of my pastimes on YouTube is I will like to watch boat people who live on sailboats and exploring boats. I like to watch people who are homesteading, even though I don't homestead myself. But it's very interesting to me, these things to watch people, provide for themselves and live off their own land and see how adverse they are to the chemicals that are just in the air. I watched a couple who live next to a couple farms and, within a few acres, and the chemicals are wafting onto their land and they want to move because of it because they're that dedicated to not having any type of chemicals. So it's kind of crazy to actually, when you think about it, all the preservatives, all the chemicals that are in our food, and I think Five Guys probably does have some level of chemicals, but I don't think the preservatives at Five Guys are going to be anywhere near they are at McDonald's. And that's not a shame against McDonald's. It does what it does very well. I love a McDonald's burger. It's just a classic taste, whatever. I grew up
Let,
on it.
let me do a short rant on chemicals.
Sure.
I remember I lived a long time in Germany, and Germans are sort of anti-chemical and everything, and it's a cultural thing. Like when you get sick there, they prefer herbs, right?
Sure.
And I was telling them about the American medicines. I couldn't, I got a really bad flu. I was like, hey, just give me some NyQuil, man. Like, knock me out. And the Germans would call that, it's called a Chemiekeule, or like a chemical like club that hits you over the head.
I knew one.
And they say that as a bad thing. I was thinking, man, give me that, like give me that club, right? I want to knock the sickness out. So there's a cultural thing there. And I think that has kind of spread out of Germany into, started probably West Coast, but probably East Coast as well.
Yeah.
And then one of the things about chemicals, I don't, this is about show your priors. That's where I'm going with this.
Sure.
What do people actually mean with it? I remember talking to a German lady. She says, I don't eat any food with chemicals. And I thought, well, do you eat salt?
Right.
right?
Yeah, that's
Right? I mean, it's everything. Everything's
everything's a
literally. I
chemical if
mean,
you. Yeah.
everything's a chemical. But I think, and this is what I would ask you:
Yeah.
what is it that people mean? I think they're meaning like artificially added stuff,
Yeah.
uh, and GMO. I think people are talking about genetically modified organisms, although many were throughout history. I'm not judging either side here. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what people mean when they say chemicals, because it's not always clear. It would be absurd to say I don't eat chemicals in my food, right? Because,
Oh yeah.
well,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they're talking about non-naturally occurring chemicals is what they would most commonly be referring to. Um, so yeah, in non-GMO, I actually read an article just this morning, I think, where there's a cow feed that has been approved in the UK that is genetically modified. So that feed is supposed to produce juicier beef. So Britons can expect juicier beef soon.
hey, here
Just
we
as an
go.
aside.
There we
But
go.
anyways, so kind of the enigma of Five Guys and In-N-Out Burger, even though they're not the focus of this, is that they have survived and even thrived while not maximizing in the same way that their competitors have. And there's still a market for it. I kind of want to switch a little bit of gears now to advertising, because I would say I would agree. When they were first starting out and probably in their first 20 years of life, they didn't have advertising because traditional advertising was all you had. You had TV, you had radio, you had print, and that was about it. So
And
they
man,
didn't.
when I look back on
Yeah.
those TV ads, you remember the local TV ads? Those things are brutal.
Oh yeah.
Maybe some in future show we need to go back and look at those, how
Yeah.
we used to advertise
Oh yeah.
and how cringe it is, if that's the word
Yeah.
that
Marketing
people
evolution
use
or
today,
something. That's a. Let me actually
or
write that
how
down. That's a good
it
one.
was really bad. But we've advanced quite far since then. But
Right.
yeah, how much would you have to pay for a local ad, and would it even matter? I don't know. I mean, probably the best advertising, and it operates through social proof, is word of mouth.
Yeah.
Some guy on the TV or lady on the TV talking about it, even if it's a celebrity that, hey, you should try Five Guys, is less valuable than your best friend who went through there,
Oh yeah. Conversion rates can be
somebody you
way
respect.
higher on word of mouth.
Yeah.
However, you're getting a lot fewer impressions. So that's the drawback. Even though your click-through rate's better, you're getting fewer impressions, right?
Yeah, your click-through rate's astronomical compared to the other, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah. When your friend recommends something to you, you're more inclined to do it because you have similar tastes, and that's just the way. That's the way.
Yeah.
That's
That's why you're friends in the first place. Yeah.
usually.
Yeah.
I know that some of my friends don't watch movies I recommend because they don't. They think I like weird movies, which is probably true. But anyways, that's beside the point. Anyhow, so let's talk a little bit about advertising today. So when I was watching Diary of a CEO with the Five Guys CEO on it, which I think was from last year, maybe the year before, I don't know. It was about a year old, 2 years old, something like that. Anyways, I was watching through that and I'm thinking, I don't know Stephen Bartlett's model. So it did occur to me that does Diary of a CEO charge companies to have these CEOs come in? Because they're essentially sitting there for 2 to 3 hours just saying everything fantastic about their own company that they can. What a platform. They have 50 million listeners, whatever. It seems like it's a very valuable thing. They don't. I did a little bit of research. They don't charge. There's no money exchange there because it's they want to keep their the people who come on. They want to make sure it's interesting and engaging, and it'd be like a betrayal of the audience if you were charging money for the guests.
Well, we should probably drop a link.
Oh, to Darby's for sure, absolutely. We
Yeah.
can drop a link to that in our description. Not a problem. I'm pretty sure everyone who watches the show probably knows what that is, but we will absolutely do that. Anyhow, so that aside, I think they can still sit today and say that we do not do traditional advertising, but they absolutely do modern advertising, which is things like going on a podcast, things like social media. Let me actually look right here and see if I can find a Five Guys social media. That's a good question. Something I may have probably have done before I made this statement, but let me see. Yeah, absolutely. Five Guys Instagram. So they're absolutely doing modern advertising now. So that kind of argument about we don't advertise is a little bit misleading today, but they did start that way.
Yeah, and people who know anything about it know there's a lot of art that goes into those pictures, right? There's a reason they look exactly like they do. There's a lot of money in that too, making those.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, there's somebody had to come in and make this perfect burger, and probably not even some of those things probably aren't even edible just because it looks better photographed, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
whole art in itself. So I also looked at other companies. So I had the thought of, what are some other companies that don't advertise? So, and what I got in return was most of them were high dollar items. Rolls Royce, Lamborghini kind of doesn't advertise, stuff like that. Really, stuff that's really high end market type brands don't do traditional advertising. Almost exclusively, it was that, and then it was things that were storefront driven traffic. So I looked up, Zara is a brand, a fast fashion brand that doesn't advertise traditionally, but they spend big dollars on storefront displays and just over the top to get the foot traffic in, and also to kind of make it other people now are taking pictures of it and putting on socials. That's another thing today. It's indirect advertising. But those are the kind of things I get. And so when I think about Five Guys and what they were doing with their advertising is they were sending a smell out the door, getting foot traffic in. And so they relied solely on their location to make sure that they had a high volume foot traffic moving across their door with a pleasant aroma coming out, and then having a really good experience delivering on a good product and good service, and then counting on that to drive your business with referrals, essentially. It's a pretty incredible, today to say that was successful. It doesn't seem like that is something that would be successful. It seems like that is the path of most resistance, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a brutal business. Hey, let me ask you this, because I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Founder with Michael Keaton.
I
Really
have
good,
not.
really good movie. You should watch it if you're into restaurants and how do you grow them. And let me ask you this. This is something I always ask when we're talking about business models, because when we were thinking about Five Guys, it's clearly the brand, locally sourcing, and then that brand has blown up through word of mouth, and obviously that's been successful. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody would dispute that. But Michael Keaton and The Founder, great movie. And the question you ask, and I still ask this to people, why is McDonald's successful? What is it? What is the most important thing in their business model? And I thought this was apocryphal, by the way, meaning mythical, right? That it's just something people say. I did a little research before, and please, people, check. But I think it's legit what I'm about to say. But I'm just going to ask you, what do you think? And I'll tell you what most people say, and then I'll see if you know.
I think it's changed over the years. I think today it's convenience and nostalgia a lot.
Yeah,
Um, I think originally it was they did a really good job of capturing what Americana was at the time.
yeah, yeah. The golden arches, etc. He talks about that in the movie. He just wanted the sign, right? It's a
Hmm.
great name, right?
Yeah.
And another thing McDonald's has done well, if you've ever visited one in Europe, they're brilliant compared to the United States.
Oh, really?
They're closer to a premium fast food, if you
Hmm.
want to say it.
Yeah.
It's close, it's kind of like a mix of Starbucks and McDonald's, if you can imagine it. They always have good coffee. And when you talk about the value proposition of McDonald's, me as a parent and in other places in the world, it's simply, hey, they're going to have a decent bathroom or on the road. You got the go-to, the chicken nuggets or the just the plain hamburger and the Happy Meal. And it's just a secure place to go, right? Like, is it the best quality? I don't think anybody would claim that, but the value proposition is clear and it depends on the segment, right? They serve lower end segments, of course. Now, the thing that people mostly say is McDonald's is an operations machine,
Hmm.
right? And he goes into this in the movie. The question is, how did they become such an operations machine? And when you want to say there's a scene there, and you want to say, what is the thing that really drives the business where they're able to keep that consistent quality across the entire globe? That's not an easy feat, right? People really underestimate how difficult that is. There's a scene in it where they're having, maybe it's one of these, couple scenes. They're having difficulties controlling the franchisees. So it's
Hmm.
a franchisee model,
Yeah.
and they're getting reports of bad quality from some of their franchisees. And then the story goes that what McDonald's ended up doing was buying the real estate upon which they would put their stores, And then the franchisees would be forced into quality standards, otherwise they would lose their rental agreement or
Makes
lease
sense.
agreement.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that was how they enforced it, and they were so good at it that McDonald's, some people would say they're actually a real estate company and not a fast food company. That they were so damn good at it, right? And I had this picture up there. I don't know if you got it, where you got Burger King and McDonald's, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, because it's fascinating how the what the dynamics of the restaurant industry are.
Sure.
McDonald's was so good at this, at least this is the claim, that Burger King didn't even bother to do the real estate work. They just would co-locate because they knew McDonald's is so good at this, right? I should co-locate. And if you particularly in the United States, don't you find it odd that when you see one fast food restaurant there are three or four in
Well,
the same area?
take a step back and explain co-locate to me. What do you mean by that for Burger King's stance?
So you when you want to start a restaurant, you don't want to put it in the woods, right?
Right.
You need a place where you'll get the most foot traffic, the most traffic going through. McDonald's, for example, is along the interstate quite often, right? And you'll
Sure.
see Burger King right next to them. But and Chick-fil-A, I think, is also good at this these days. So when you want to put it in a neighborhood, McDonald's is really good at locating the area where they'll maximize their population that would visit it,
Sure.
and then spreading out the stores. They can't be too close to each other either. Otherwise, you pull
Yeah,
traffic from one another,
makes
right?
sense.
So Burger King's assumption was, well, they're really good at that. Let's just
Okay.
co-locate,
So you mean
right?
they're building they're setting down stakes near a McDonald's almost every time.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And you probably, and I asked about this because I was curious about this. Why is it when you go to a McDonald's or Burger King that there's a Wendy's, there's a Taco Bell, there's a
Yeah.
KFC,
Yeah.
they're all near each other. Now Chick-fil-A probably tries to stay a little bit further away. It's a different game, right? They're closer to a Five Guys, I think, in quality, or at least the expectation of quality.
I like them better. I would
So
agree.
yeah, so why? And people would say, this seems strange, right? Aren't they competing?
Yeah.
And I did a project in my MBA class, and I asked an expert on it. He did intelligence, business intelligence in restaurants. And he told me, I think this is fascinating. No, 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 no. These restaurants aren't competing against each other. Restaurants compete against the following: grocery stores. Why? The assumption is in the restaurant industry is that cooking is your enemy,
Yeah.
right? Because once you decide to go out, you're out. You're going to eat somewhere.
Sure.
So their biggest battle is to get you out of the house.
Right.
That's the competition, which I always found that fascinating because we're so used to thinking, oh, they both make burgers. They're competing against each other. But actually, maybe they're not. They can kind of benefit from if a bunch of people go out to eat, then they can kind of get a piece of the action, both of them, by being in a similar spot. Because if you go to McDonald's, and you've done this, I'm sure, you'll go to a Chili's or whatever. Well, maybe Chili's isn't so packed these days, but you go to a Texas Roadhouse and it's packed, and you have this sort of mechanism in your head, and you say, okay, if it's 20 minutes, we'll stay. If it's 45-minute wait, let's go somewhere else. And that's that mechanism, right? You're If you don't get in the time you think, you're gonna go to another restaurant.
Yeah.
It may not be the one you wanted, but that's how that works. And I always found that fascinating. It's obvious when you look at it in hindsight, but it's kind of counterintuitive, which I like those kinds of things because it really gets you into really what are the assumptions driving this business. It's not always what you think. Another one that's interesting that I ran across when I did an internship at Disney, people would say, well, when you go down to Disney World, it's expensive as hell, right, to go down there. But they'll say, well, Disney just gives you such a great experience. They give you like the
Universal's right
travel.
next door. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
this is where I'm going with it, right? Well, they give you a ride from the hotel, they put you on the premises, they make sure that you don't even need a car. Well, why do they want you to not have a car?
Because you go somewhere else.
Yeah,
Yeah. You
because you can go to
captive.
Universal, right? So, yeah, it is a good customer experience, but it also has the benefit of preventing you from leaving the property,
Yeah.
which the more you're on a Disney property, the more you're going to spend, right? And you're
So
going to spend a lot.
so this is so. First of all, what I'm showing on screen right now is Chili's stock over the last 5 years. It's just FYI,
Yeah.
they're doing fantastic. They're down at the moment on like on the year, but who isn't? But Chili's doing great, by the way. So I resent your Chili's slander. They're
Well,
fantastic.
so this is a good example of priors. I think this is a great example of priors. And it's a good example of why you shouldn't depend on anecdotes.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna say exactly where I live. There's a local Chili's restaurant,
fair.
and the quality is abysmal.
Yeah,
And so I think I probably made this mistake of thinking, oh, like I went to an Applebee's, same thing. Maybe check Applebee's. I don't even know. See what their stocks do, if they're even around anymore.
there.
But you kind of visibly see the quality falling, but it may just be one restaurant. Maybe they didn't solve the thing that McDonald's solved, as pointed out in the founder. So you can't extrapolate from one piece of data and then say, oh, the entire set of Chili's restaurants is just falling off the cliff on the quality. So that would have been a mental mistake on my part.
So
A
I
bad one,
found
actually.
the. Oh, here we go. Here's the Applebee's stock chart.
But
Let's go to the 5 year.
I was the reason well, okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Applebee's. Dine Brands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was thinking that because you're getting all these news stories that and you start to think, and this is again, news makes you overestimate the probability of something.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, well, okay, Bahama Breeze is closing, Red Lobster's closing. They're going, I don't know if they all went into bankruptcy, but they're closing lots of stores.
Yeah.
So you thought, well, maybe Chili's is on the same path, but clearly that's a
Well, so let me be a little bit of devil's advocate here. So just because a Red Lobster is closing its doors doesn't mean it's going out of business in the market. Not today. And I don't know specifically Red Lobster in their business model, but I will say that ghost kitchens are on the rise. So that could mean there are restaurants out there that you can find only on your DoorDash, on your meal delivery service apps. There's restaurants out there that are only on those apps, and they don't have walk-in traffic. They don't even have a storefront. Some of them are just kitchens in a industrial area, something like that, where it's cheap
yeah.
square footage. So that exists. And also what exists is companies that market in multiple ways. So you could have one restaurant that presents itself in three different ways inside of a Grubhub or a DoorDash app, selling, one looks like an upscale diner. One looks like a, really cheap and quick, but it's the same place, same food, same menu. They've just now marketed it to different people, looking at different segments, even though it's all
Yeah.
coming in the same place. It's a really interesting phenomenon that's happening. And it kind of also, makes me wonder, like, is that a truth in advertising issue? I don't know. I don't want to get too much into that, but businesses are really having to think outside of the box to remain competitive today. And it may just be that the brick and mortar and the foot traffic business just isn't there anymore because people don't
Because of
want to
COVID.
go out. They want to have it delivered, and they're willing to pay the money to have it delivered for the convenience, which personally I'm not any longer. I did for a very long time. I would DoorDash multiple times a day. I cannot explain to you how much more money I feel like I have today after I stopped DoorDashing all the time.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that obviously came from COVID, right?
Yeah,
And we say in innovation, your biggest competition is changing existing customer behavior,
sure.
and it's rare. And I think COVID was such a rare event that it really did start new habits for people, start neural pathways hardening
Yeah,
for new habits that didn't exist before COVID. And I probably would never have done food delivery if I hadn't done it in Singapore. Singapore,
hmm.
by the way, they're really good at this, right? They eat out all the time. They have cheap options. You have so many options, and it's so efficient. They deliver your groceries. So it was not such a difficult thing being there during COVID because they're so efficient at everything, getting everything to your door. But yeah, I think what happened there is people had to change their business model. You mentioned even Five Guys had to do it. And this was one of the innovations that occurred during that time, probably, these ghost kitchens, right?
Yeah,
And the only question is, and this is what we saw in the air business, that people during COVID were obviously more concerned about quality of air, but it reverted to afterwards to, oh, air's fine. Yeah. But in this case, I wonder. if it will revert back. Like you yourself are saying
Yeah.
that, hey, I've recognized maybe, especially with inflation, right?
Yeah.
Maybe these prices are not justified anymore. And then maybe you'll return to your previous behavior where even going to a restaurant is cheaper than eating at home. But
Yeah.
then you're trading convenience for price, right?
Yeah. I do think, the conflicts that are going on right now could drive prices, could drive inflation high. I just read this morning that the Fed is, they're floating out there a hike for their next adjustment, which I'm not surprised by because, inflation is happening. That's how you counteract it these days is by, hiking the interest rates. So, if things get bad enough with gas prices, et cetera, and the strain on, your common man, then yeah, I do think eventually things may reset back the other way where going to the grocery
Well,
store is a lot more popular. It may put a lot of restaurants altogether out of business because people are eating rice and beans
yeah.
more than they are Cheesecake Factory.
Well, and you see this dissension, right? Like so this descent where you go from casual to fast casual to fast when you have this sort of prices spike. You expect that to happen.
Yeah,
So the ones at the bottom of the chain should benefit actually because
should.
they have lower price. Should.
Yeah,
But those aren't the same segments, right? There's got to be the people that aren't too snobby to go down to the fast level, but it's really about price is
yeah.
why they're going down.
Well, what blows my mind today is that I can go to McDonald's or I go to what we have locally is something called Brahms, and we get
I
burgers there.
remember.
And for me and Amy, it's 21, $24 all in for both of us to have a meal.
Yeah.
If we go to a Tex-Mex restaurant, that's nothing fancy, but just one that is here around town, it's about the same price before tip. So that is kind of mind blowing to me that you can go in and get what
Yeah.
I perceive to be a much better, much more filling experience at the least for about the same price as I can do a drive through these days. And really the only amount that I'm paying in addition to that is for the service of the waiter or waitress.
Yeah.
So that's kind of something that's I've been trying to grasp in like how these prices have risen. I remember going to Mickey D's and getting a double quarter pounder with cheese for $7.55 with a combo. Like I vividly remember that doing that in the 2000s. I'm an old man, but I was around for that. Now going and paying $20 or whatever for my meal is just mind
Yeah.
blowing to me.
Well, we know look, supply chains are messed up right now.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's obviously putting pressure on prices, but it's also something you got to think about strategically how often this will occur. Happened during COVID, massive chain disruptions, and that obviously drives prices up, as I said. And I think what we're circling around, and this will come to what we were talking about earlier, is you wouldn't have expected Five Guys to have succeeded ex ante, like up front, if somebody had told you that idea. You think, no chance in America this will work. And to do it at a premium price compared to fast food. And then we talked about, well, COVID forced some business model innovation. And will it revert? We don't know. And one of the interesting things to talk about in innovation is, hey, how could you maybe disrupt the the food industry, the restaurant industry? And one of the examples I like to give, because disruption ends up being sort of a buzzword, we're gonna pivot right now. We're gonna make a hard pivot to think about disruption.
digital
And the
transformation.
original, yeah, digital transformation, it doesn't end up being a disruption because it's only a buzzword. So something actually has to happen. There have to be projects and business model changes for it to not remain a buzzword. So one of the things I like to do is think about disruption using a historical example.
Yeah.
And the original disruption theory comes from a guy he taught at Harvard for a while, Clayton Christensen. And he had this idea that disruption starts on the periphery, and we'll get into this, where it starts with cheaper products, maybe, or they're just good enough. Maybe it's a software that you launched, doesn't have all the fancy features that the big corporates are using. And so when corporates are looking at it, they just don't see that as interesting. It's lower prices, etc. Yeah, we're not going to get much margin out of that. We have much more volume. This is a small niche market. And eventually, this new thing, and this was his theory, I'm describing it, gets better and better and better. And then it disrupts you. That's the whole point of the word, like forces you to break apart, if you take the
Sure.
Latin word.
Yeah.
Um, and it came out of nowhere. It's kind of like the devil's advocate. Never let them see you coming. So these disruptions, you can't see them from corporate because you look at them like, oh, it's just like a little fly over there. It's not an interesting market. But eventually, as I said, they get better and better and better, and then they're in your market. And then
Yeah.
it's too late.
Yeah.
And it's too late because they have a different cost structure than you. They have a different value proposition from you. And you have all these legacy costs, right, that you can't just get rid of. The example people like to use a lot is Netflix came, we talked about it already with mail DVDs versus these fixed infrastructures
Yeah.
at Blockbuster, the real estate. Okay, so now let's think about this. I think actually disruption is more about the system, is more about the entire business model. I'll give you an example. Because when you look into Silicon Valley and X and VC talk, it's almost exclusively about technology. It's a fixation on tech startups, tech disruption. And I'm going to do something a little bit contrarian and say nobody gives a damn about your technology.
Yeah.
Technos, if you go to the original Greek word of techne, just meant like an art, a skill. And it's going to be more about this. So let me give you an example. Let's take a look at Alexander the Great. I don't know if you've heard of Alexander the Great. I'm sure you
Ah,
have.
I think he did a little something in Egypt, I think.
Little something, right? So one of the explanations, so he is known for having the biggest empire in the fastest time possible. And the question is, how did this happen? And the easy story is that we see, and I gave you this picture with these long spears. So people will fixate on the spear, which is called the sarissa. And
Yeah.
the reason it was disruptive, well, look how damn long it is, versus at the time, you had these Greeks in phalanxes, right? And they'd have this shield, and they would stab out from behind it with a much shorter spear.
Yeah. Like
And
300.
the idea, yeah, like in 300, right? But and the Romans later had it, they disrupted this phalanx, right, is what it's called. But the idea was that because they had so much length, they could do that. Okay, but there's a great book on this where you start to understand, did he really conquer all that territory because of an 18-foot spear? Why couldn't the enemies just have made the same spear, find longer wood? But so that gets suspicious, that story, very quickly. Was it just a spear? Like, how could that be? You could just copy that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well,
We'll get
you
deeper.
debut it, and then the next time you face that enemy, they may have them again. But if you've wiped
Well,
them
maybe they
out,
just killed everybody so fast that they couldn't respond and make a longer spear. I don't know, but
well,
it sounds a little bit.
pigeons didn't travel too fast back then, compared to email
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. Well, we saw that on Game of Thrones, right? They
Yeah.
don't travel fast enough in certain cases. So, yeah. So, was it the technology? And I'm not going to say that the technology played no role. Of course it did. Of course, but it's only a part of the story. Let me get into the longer story. There's a great book called Soldiers and Ghosts, and you'll flash it on the screen. I would recommend anybody read this because you'll start to understand that innovation and strategy and disruption in particular have to do with a systems view.
Hmm.
Now, let me explain. For a long time, Sparta and Athens were dominating the ancient Greek world, right? Athens was a sea power. And one of the dangers of being a sea power is you start to see every battle as naval. Why? Because you want to force everything into a naval battle.
That's where your strength
Okay,
is. Yeah.
that's where your strength is. So you start to interpret the world as a naval world, right? And that's obviously why you do that. But this is a big strategic trap for you because what if there's a strong land power like Sparta?
Hmm.
Sparta was landlocked and they had a bunch of helots, slaves. And so that military dictatorship that they had to get really good at not just controlling a slave population that was the majority of the population, so they had this really martial culture to do that. They also, there were barbarians coming over the hills constantly attacking back in the day, right? So they got a lot of practice at land warfare. Now, problem, you start to see the whole world in terms of land warfare. Now, you also had city states. So war was often between city states. And what this book does a really good job of is there was this sort of ethic around the way that you fought war. It wasn't really to the death. It was kind of like cities would fight for, you were both Greek, right? But you'd fight for bragging rights, for trading rights, for whatever, right? It's more about honor. And this guy makes a good point, or this author makes a good point, that they had interpreted Homer in that way,
Yeah.
that this is how you fight. Now, interestingly, I believe Alexander was also trained educationally, right, by a Greek. It was Aristotle, I believe. And for some reason, though, he didn't take the same lessons from Homer's work that the other Greeks did, where it was a battle for honor. And they would even say, like, the way you fight these battles was you slam into each other with your phalanxes, and
Hmm.
last man standing wins the battle. But it's about bragging rights. Now, Alexander was playing a different game. Alexander had more of the Achilles kind of story in his head, where he's like, the leader has to rush into battle. And by the way, we're going to use horses and we're going to station it way over here and we're going to break the traditional phalanx. So he's already questioning the whole system of warfare, which gives you a massive advantage because when the others see that coming, and that was the quote, it's like when they came, it was like this roar of thunder that would just roll over the enemies, and clearly it was working. And part of it was how they stationed their horses, and then they had these spears we already talked about. But it was also the military culture, the ethos was different.
Sure. Yeah.
It was that your leaders had to have skin in the game. They had to run headlong into battle and take massive risk, and he got injured a lot. Now, why? Well, it was a very Spartan militaristic culture, and the leaders had to demonstrate their valor, their worth of even being a leader in battle. And if you didn't, well, if you're surrounded by other military people, you're no longer there, right? That's the way it worked in those days. It was a very bellicose, martial, warlike culture. And so he also stationed his troops, interestingly, to create competition between them. Who could be the most valorous, I believe is the word,
Hmm.
right? The bravest, the one that demonstrates glory in battle. And so that was the how war changed was also just a change in perception of the whole world of how war is supposed to be fought. It wasn't about land or sea. Alexander had a wholly different conception, but it goes beyond that. So you'd say, okay, the way you fight battles, I got it. He also threw out the the sort of honor, the way that honor played in war. He wasn't afraid to use stratagems, they called them, to use deceit, to use guile, to trick enemies to win a battle.
So he's
So,
he's cultivating a culture
yes,
of warriors who are proud warriors that you want to rise in society by your military accomplishments or who you can beat in a duel,
yes,
that kind of thing, right?
yes. And that's a very good point because as strange as it seems, when you read history, you think, oh, they're at war all the time. But many of the Greek city-states, they didn't really have a standing army. Maybe Sparta did,
Yeah.
but the others really didn't. So it was like voluntary fire brigade whenever a war started. And you can imagine the discipline of people who aren't fighting war all the time.
Yeah.
So because he was cultivating this constant warrior-like culture, they had an advantage going into a war. Now, it doesn't stop there. So let's say you win a battle, that doesn't mean that you get the territory. You have to actually administrate after it. So how did they do that? Well, part of it was parceling out land, right? To pay the warriors, leave their best ones behind to administer the land. And then you go farther, he used the Greek culture to spread a common administrative language. It was called the Koine, right? The Koine Greek. And so that was so strong that it lasted up until the time of Marcus Aurelius, who, the famous book that he wrote, The Reflections. He actually wrote them in Koine Greek.
Yeah, he was the
You would think he wrote them a lot. He was the emperor, right? In
yeah.
Gladiator,
Yeah, he was the emperor at the beginning of Gladiator. Joaquin Phoenix killed him. Yeah, that was exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah, damn Joaquin for that, because he was one of the philosophical emperors
Yeah,
known for like I think
he's one of the great loved leaders of all time. I
the
think.
Stoic,
Yeah,
yeah, great love leaders. Well, who knows? Because the victors write the history books, but that's at least
yeah,
the story that
fair.
we get handed down that he was philosophical. But the point there is, it took a whole reconception of all the systems at the time to beat them. And the spear, when you think of it that way, this 18-foot or however long it was spear was only a piece.
Hmm.
So when you want to think about how you would attack a business, you got to think through all the elements of the system. And we talked about, I think, that in the first episode. So if you wanted to attack McDonald's, you might think that it's about the burgers, the quality. You
Yeah,
might think it's about the operations and being efficient and keeping low margins and being very, very productive, but you might have missed the real estate piece,
yeah,
right? You
yeah,
might have missed that McDonald's, much like Alexander the Great, he was they're able to spread around the globe because they're very lenient with the local cultures. They actually adapt to them. I don't know. Do you know, and I don't know if this is crazy to think about, that the most popular McDonald's in the world for a long time, do you know where it is? You would never guess it.
no idea.
You have to check. It was that for a while because people will fact check me here. And it's still popular. It was in France.
Yeah, that's not
You
what
would
I would guess.
you never would guess that because you think, oh, the French, they have such a cultivated sense. They have great taste for food. And somehow it was very popular there. I don't know if it still is. It may have been dethroned. But when you go there, it's a different menu. They
Yeah,
adapt it to the local culture. Like you have croissants, you have, different types of cheese that you wouldn't have in the United States. You have different sauces. And
we
I
have
always preferred,
Le Big
sorry,
Mac, and you have
Big Tasty when I
Royale
was
with
in
cheese.
Russia.
Royale with cheese.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the Royale, right?
yeah,
And sorry, American McDonald's, but the ones I've tried in Europe, just they were better. I don't know why, because the quality's different. Their coffees were better. But anyway, I just wanted to give that story. And, if you look at the map, it was always obviously successful. Uh, it was a business model innovation, really, what Alexander did. It started on the periphery of the Greek Empire.
yeah.
Macedonians were seen as like this uncultivated, uncivilized hill people. And then suddenly they're ruling over you. You can imagine, right? And the reason they were able to do that, they just didn't share the same assumptions of the Greek world.
Let me
And this is something,
let me
yeah,
close
go
the
ahead.
loop on this McDonald's location just real quick. So, I don't doubt what you're saying. I just what Gemini is telling me. We'll take it with a grain of salt. The most epic Mickey D's is in Orlando,
Epic.
Florida, right now on Sand Lake Road. The most unique, the McSki in Sweden. It's probably ski in, ski out McDonald's, I think. The biggest by opening day was in Warsaw, Poland.
I believe that.
It's not saying anything about France. I just wanted to update you
No,
on
but
that.
well, most visited maybe is, I don't know, the one that does the most business. Anyway, at a time when I looked a long time ago,
I don't doubt that you were correct at one time. Yes.
well, maybe I could be wrong, but it was also the fact that it was even popular in France, the place where you'd think it wouldn't be. Anyway,
So am I saying Moscow? Anyways, but yes.
yeah, I mean, I was gonna wrap that up anyway. Is that when you're thinking about business and disruption, you have to think through the entire system and think of it like this system is operating in an environment where you have hill people on the edges of your business, right?
Yeah.
And they don't give a damn about your taste, your culture, your business model, and you can really get trapped.
Yeah.
And the CIA has this phrase called mirror imaging. One of the biggest strategic mistakes you can make is to assume that the other side thinks exactly like you.
Is that like
This is
it's like
it's
a narcissistic technique where you mirror what the other person is doing to
I don't know if it's narcissism.
ingratiate yourself?
the Greeks noticed this a long time ago that, and there's even a saying on it, for any moral that you have, you can find a culture with the opposite moral, right?
Yeah, fair.
And and so they recognized that early that this is happening. Yeah, they were still disgusted by it, but what was fascinating to them was the other cultures were disgusted by their morality, right? And so is it narcissism? No, it's actually, I think, easy to understand. You grow up in one culture and you formulate your assumptions of the world from the lens of that culture.
Okay, so
And so it's hard for you to think outside of it
yeah,
that, hey, I mean, we have a war going on, but you know, do the Iranians think exactly like us? I think the answer is pretty clearly no.
yeah.
And you can get into some very dangerous strategic scenarios just because you don't understand their worldview and how they actually operate, what's driving it, what's motivating their people, what the culture is, what the history is. And there are parts of the world, and Americans are pretty bad about this, I'd say. We have a very short memory, a
Hmm.
very short cultural memory. Like you may have bombed us last week and we're already friends again.
Yeah, it's because we're all
That's
scrolling TikTok.
not, that is not how a lot of cultures work. They remember things back to, well, the Middle East is a good example. They remember like tribal wars that go back thousands of years that's just incomprehensible for us.
Yeah,
So this is just, now corporates do this all the time. Corporates assume the world operates exactly how they perceive the world, right?
yeah.
So, and what's strange about that, I've been in some very big ones, and people will say things like, "Oh, they will have factories just like ours." Like, no, never. We have like some of the biggest factories in the world operating at scales that no one else has,
Sure.
right?
Yeah,
So, but people make this mistake, and it's very understandable. I don't think it's narcissism. I think it's just those are your priors.
yeah.
And unless you leave that context, it's almost impossible to update them.
Well, there's a couple points I want to kind of tie in Alexander to Five Guys in a couple ways. So, one, there's a theory right now, and I've not done a whole lot of research on it, so I don't want to give it too much credit. But there is a theory right now that there's a company called Sysco who's a supplier to the restaurants, and that they have a vast monopoly over restaurant supply chain. They have, all the supplies, all the restaurants are basically sourcing from the same place because there's such a big, powerful, low price operating, they offer the lowest prices to these companies because
Hmm.
they
Because they
can.
have volume.
Yeah,
They
they're
have volume.
dominating the market. So it's a monopoly in a way. And there's a theory that is causing a decline in the restaurant market in itself, just because there's no competition. So it's a prime market to be disrupted, and it's kind of like something with an empire that's getting lazy, because empires over time, as we know, they tend to get lazy and somebody disrupts them because they have a different standard for what counts as a loss in a battle, that type of thing.
Mm.
What is a victory to us may not be a loss to someone else, and that's a problem. So those type of things with empires, monopolies, they can get complacent, they can get disrupted.
That's interesting. So the one you would have to disrupt here is Cisco.
Yeah,
And the question would be how? Well, I could think of ways. One would be companies that have elite supply chains. Can you think of companies that have elite supply chain and logistics?
yeah. Amazon, Walmart.
Amazon, exactly. And they went into the Whole Foods, if you remember.
Yeah,
So who
yeah,
knows what they have on their, horizon.
yeah,
Walmart, by the way, is basically the best logistics company, well, at least in America.
yeah,
If you want, and this is what's always funny, people don't think of the food at Walmart as fresh, but it's probably the closest thing to fresh in the frozen category, right? Because they
yeah.
are so good at it. They're so efficient because they have to be. Retail, you're running low margins. So you can't have inefficiencies in your supply chain. So you might look at it from that perspective. Are there other players that maybe aren't traditionally in food distribution that could enter it by virtue of the fact that they have really good supply chains?
Yeah.
That would be more of a cost approach. The other would be what could kill Cisco is if Five Guys type models expand, where this locally sourced never frozen becomes a cultural behavior change,
Yeah.
then you're in trouble because, well, that that whole value proposition of cheap, low price, frozen disappears. Now, will that happen? I don't know. There's always been a lot of, I don't want to call it snobbery, but there's always been this whole culture, especially towards the high end, about being very particular about how food is cooked, how
Yeah.
it's prepared. Was it locally sourced? Maybe it was actually spice taken from a very exotic region of the world, right? That used to be the case. That was what the whole the
Silk Road.
Silk
Yeah.
Road was about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and exotic spices, locally sourced, organic is another name you could throw out there. Non-GMO things that almost by virtue of not having, you know, the high volume commoditized nature are premium just by definition. They're harder to get access to.
Yeah.
And that sounds like people with money, but a lot of culture is distributed from people with money, right? I've heard some stories I think are apocryphal, meaning mythical, but one example was there was a kingdom. I'm not going to say where because this could be just a completely mythical story, but it demonstrates the point. So there was a kingdom where they wanted to introduce potatoes,
Okay.
but they had never been there before. And so the people weren't eating the potatoes. They just found them disgusting. So the story goes like this. The king had this brilliant idea. Dad was the king, but the king had this brilliant idea. Let's put potatoes in the royal garden and put guards around it.
Make it a taboo or make it something that's coveted.
No, if people are guarding it, it must be valuable.
Yeah.
Ooh, and the royals are eating potatoes,
Hmm.
super valuable potatoes. They're putting guards around it. And then it starts to diffuse, right? That starts to spread because you have the elite using something, then the commoners are thinking, "Oh, that must be an elite product, an elite food," and then it starts to spread that way.
Yeah.
This is a common marketing
Well,
technique,
you can
right?
talk
Start a
about
diet.
milk here in the or dairy here in the States. There was a big push, I think, after World War II to we had a big pile of, what they called government cheese at the time, and
Yeah.
they had to put a big marketing campaign around it to get rid of it.
Well, why do you have people who endorse products? It's the same mechanism. Oh, if Tiger Woods uses that golf club, that means if I use it, then it's,
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
I'm gonna hit.
yeah. I mean, that's the age-old marketing axiom: is that you need to create or give the perception that there's an issue with something that you can or cannot do, and that Tiger Woods, as an example, has the answer, and it's his Titleist or Nike golf shoes, something like that.
Yeah. So maybe this cultural change goes from beyond the people with the money that can afford the locally sourced, the non-GMO, the organic, and it spreads into the common culture, the plebeians like us, right?
Hmm.
And then we say, "Oh, I want that." Well, then that model might face a threat. And this is what I mean. That's not a sarissa. That's a cultural change,
What
right?
is a
It's
Sarissa?
that was that long spear.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's not the technology. It's actually the culture was a leading indicator that something else is going to change. Then the technology has to adapt to match that culture. The advertising has to adapt.
yeah,
Has to look more like Five Guys or Asada as you used, right? Um, so that's what we mean by you got to look at the whole system, the culture,
yeah,
the company itself, customers, and those are very difficult things to predict and detect, which is why if somebody had told you, yeah, Five Guys has no chance, the trends are not on their side, they just happen to be wrong. They tapped into, it sounds like, a few of those trends and it worked. But the base rates, back to the base rates,
hmm,
the probability of starting such a chain and succeeding,
yeah,
or even a local one, is just
yeah.
catastrophically low.
Well, what I like to talk about in sales is something that there is always going to be an element of luck, or if you want to call it timing, or there has to be a need that arises for one of your customers, and you have to be there at the right time and place to fulfill that need.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, there is an element of luck there. However, the skill is the fact that you can foster that relationship over time. You make yourself always available, give good service, customer service. This is really what good business
But
comes down to, is saying what you'll do and delivering.
and I'm about to deliver a supreme tangent here,
Sure.
but social proof helps,
Yeah,
right? These
absolutely.
cultural elite, the cultural gatekeepers help. And this is what I think. I'm going to pivot to AI because I saw an article, I shared it with you
Sure.
earlier
Yeah.
today, that you're seeing on the one hand, the tech community is super optimistic about AI, and we're in this weird spot. They live in a bubble where their whole world is AI. Now, I've been doing some customer interviews for my own business over the last couple of weeks, and I go into corporate. And do you know how spread AI is? You know how fast it's spreading?
Like what the adoption rates are? Well, no,
Yeah,
I don't.
yeah.
Whatever you're asking, I don't know the answer to
It's not spreading.
at all.
So I was even talking to a guy, and he said, "Man, they're not even using the last digital tools that were introduced.
Yeah.
It's just really difficult to get people to change their workflow and their behavior. That's the theme of this whole show
Yeah.
so far, is very difficult to get people to change their behavior. It can be very dangerous. So it could be dangerous for corporate if no one changes their behavior, or that could be dangerous for the AI companies who are trying to sell into enterprise that nobody's adopting this.
Yeah.
And on top, so I want to go back to the cultural
Well,
gatekeepers.
so hang on one sec.
Shoot.
So, as someone who's been in a corporation who's had AI forced upon him, and you need to use it, and we're looking at adoption rates, et cetera, et cetera. Um, if you just give me Copilot, there's a limited amount of things that I can do with Copilot. It can polish my emails up. I could dictate an email to Copilot and say, polish this for me and get it ready to send, and it can save me some time in that regard. It could also help me create some PowerPoint slides, maybe make some pictures, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
These little efficiencies, but they are self-deterministic. I have to determine how to use it to make myself better. What they're missing and what hasn't been captured yet is the best way to get these tools into, various pieces of the enterprise in very specific ways that it makes a tool that it's built in that the employee is going to use to make their life better because the AI is in the background working. What we have today is just people saying, here's AI, use it. Well, that's not going to do a whole lot for me because the AI, I can't loop it into my systems for security reasons. I can't make my own agents, that kind of thing on work property. So there's a lot of reasons why I don't benefit from AI in a lot more ways than I would like to, but I do believe it's coming. I believe it's going to happen.
I think that's clear. I think it's out of Pandora's box. But I think there are two reasons the adoption rate is slow.
Yeah.
One is the people that should be pushing it in corporate leadership, and they don't understand it.
Sure.
They don't understand which use cases we can use this for. And I've seen many quotes where when they have tried to use it, they just don't see any impact on the bottom line. And that's a very quick way for a fad to end.
Yeah.
Like, we're just not seeing any benefits other than this email, maybe a little bit of productivity. We've also seen some court cases where they're hallucinating. Is it even safe to use it?
Yeah.
I did an interview the other day, and the person was like, I'd like to demo, but we have to talk to the AI safety board. So we have probably more AI safety boards than we have AI adoption in corporate already.
Sure.
But the other reason is I think the people in Silicon Valley pushing tech, they're often young. They have no work experience other than living out there and doing startups. They have no idea what the use cases would even be in corporate. They're throwing, cannonballs at the wall, and they're just not going to breach it because they don't understand the user context.
Yeah.
They just haven't done the traditional discovery work that you need to do to find out how could you actually create impact. And then the marketing's been awful, right? You shouldn't let AI think for yourself. Also, it's going to automate everything. Those are contradictory, right? So I wanted to get to another reason that it's going to be struggling
Mm-hmm.
is there seems to be this cultural elite that's developing an anti-AI bias, the cultural gatekeeper. So instead of being the king with the potatoes with the guards around it to make it more attractive, you're now seeing like academics in particular, at least that's the impression I get from some of the articles I'm reading, they're very anti-AI.
Yeah.
And they're cultural gatekeepers. The whole academy is a medieval guild, right? You have
Whoa.
to spend 7, 8 years to get into it. You have to apprentice with no money.
So let me just say this real quick, and this is very opinionated, but I view academia as an elite class. So
It is.
therefore, they want to maintain status quo.
Yes.
AI is
And
going to
state,
extremely disrupt that, and therefore there's a conflict, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, status is the key word.
Yeah,
The academia is all about status keeping. And we can do a whole rant on academia at some time.
sure.
Since the great Chinese empires of old, academia has been a gatekeeper for the elite.
Yeah,
It just has been.
yeah,
And they want to maintain that. And the way that they maintain that is be maintaining a monopoly on knowledge work. What qualifies as knowledge work, as research? Now they have their own damn problems. Nobody reads their research. I
yeah.
think the average, I don't know if you have time to look it up, but the average academic published article has maybe 4 or 5 readers.
They're all peers. I mean, they're just reading
They're
each
all
other's.
peers.
Yeah,
No, but even 4 or 5 views. So imagine you released a video like this and you only have 4 or 5 views. You have no impact. Um, and that's for people at elite universities producing research. Now, they got tenure, and then they got people coming along saying, hey, this is again maybe a marketing mistake. We can do your research for you. And actually, the research is better than what you're producing. Now, you can imagine what those people are saying. We are the gatekeepers. We decide what qualifies as good research. So, this is going to be a huge problem because the people that should be teaching young people how to embrace AI, how to think about AI, are completely biased against it.
yeah,
Now, some of those positions are legitimate. They're with every topic, and we talked about this, AI, whether it's machine learning or LLMs or whatever, they have their problems. We know LLMs hallucinate, confabulate, they're too sycophantic. Yeah, we know all the risks. We've seen them.
hmm
That's one thing, but there are also upsides. And if you're not training your students how to work with that and how to think about it as a citizen, how to think about it in your field, you're doing a disservice, I think, right now. Because you and I both believe, and I think we have slightly different opinions on AI, what's kosher and what's not.
yeah,
But we both think it's coming, and we should be preparing our kids for that. We should be preparing current employees for that. Even if the adoption rate's slow, there's a potential to make everyone's lives better or worse, depending on what happens. So this is an example where the elite, no, we don't know. This is a few stories here and there, seem to be rejecting it. And we can't discount the fact that maybe most academics are actually okay with it. It's just that the ones that are anti-AI are getting the stories right now.
yeah. We're
So we
getting
should
very
keep that in mind.
so. I think again, same thing with academia. To I mean, I feel really hokey saying this stuff, but to the world elite, AI is very disruptive to everything that's in place to keep them as elites. So it's just a situation
Yeah.
where that's why it's not. Anyway,
Well, the transparency that it could bring may not be welcomed.
yeah, yeah,
The inefficiencies that it will expose,
hmm
fraud in government, we've seen that.
yeah,
You can debate how much fraud there is, but you can be sure that AI is going to be good at tracing more and more of that.
yeah,
Now, is that for the worse or for the better? I think most citizens would say, yeah, the more transparency, the better. The ones benefiting from it, of course, Um, and you got to be cognizant of privacy rights and all the rest. But yeah, I just find it fascinating from Five Guys to that, this idea that culture can be the thing that disrupts a business, that causes it to succeed or fail.
yeah.
whether culture embraces it or not. And there's a whole graveyard of products and innovations that just never took off. It was either culture was like meh about it or they were
Yeah.
against it. But we talked about that in the first episode.
Let
It's
me
a
ask you one.
tendency to be against new tech.
Let me ask you one more thing. As a someone who teaches business strategy, um, what would you say? How do you? So Alexander was, you know, cultivating a culture of warriors. Five Guys wants to cultivate the right type of employee at their location to carry out the dedication to the quality of the product. So it's very important to them
Much like
that
Chick-fil-A.
yeah, exactly. And McDonald's too, with, you had
Yeah.
them with the real estate angle. So how do you as a business strategist recommend to leadership that they locate that employee that fits their brand or their vision or their corporate environment so perfectly?
Well, the way I think about it is find the thing in your business model, the element that is the most important. What is the make or break in your business that if it breaks, you're done?
Yeah.
And it may have been for McDonald's. Again, check through it, do your own research. That the real estate thing, if he hadn't figured that out, we don't know McDonald's like we know it today.
Sure.
But as soon as you figure out that thing, and remember our lesson on strategy is how can you be intentionally different? Find that thing that makes you intentionally different in a way that your customers actually care about. Because if they don't care about it, it's probably more on the efficiency side, and then accentuate it. The problem in most companies is they don't know that one thing because a lot of the workforce was hired into it after the founders had already left. So it's really being run by MBAs, engineers, etc., who are optimizing parts of the machine. And we don't often review that question. What is it that drives this business? McDonald's was real estate. And that's not the only thing, right? We don't want to make the mistake of saying it's the spear, but it was the one thing that made or broke their business model.
Yeah.
Five Guys, it didn't have to be that way, but as they gained their customers, we talked about Harley last time, they gained a very loyal customer segment that now is like the sword of Damocles on them because they can't get rid of it. Five Guys got a good segment, they grew it, and then they accentuate that. That's what you want to do strategically. Accentuate the thing that you do well so that you're different from the competition. If you're Five Guys, the worst thing you can do is become McDonald's
Yeah, I agree.
to try to be that. So there's often this tendency to benchmark and want to be the same as everybody else, to follow the greatest, the latest, greatest trends. But really, the art of strategy it just goes back to accentuating the difference
Yeah.
between you and the competition.
Yeah.
And for some businesses, it's sales, right? It's high touch sales. For other businesses, it's having a good aftermarket service when something goes wrong with the product in the field. I was at a company where our customers told us, you're not the cheapest and you're not the best, but you're the best at firefighting.
Yeah. So if you were
Meaning
analyzing
when things get disrupted, you're there, right?
yeah, if you're analyzing a business market to go into for, let's say, an entrepreneurship or something like that, that's when you want to find the one thing that your competition isn't doing that you can specialize in. So therefore you can create your niche. This is what I can do better than anybody else. And it's something that makes you stand out in your own way. And then you can start conquering. But you need to
Yeah.
make your own path first, right?
Yeah, think of it
Interesting.
like Alexander the Great found a niche model that worked well enough that it expanded across the globe.
Yeah.
He found a new model and it became a huge advantage. Now, not every niche business needs to expand and conquer the world. You can have a very good power washing business in a few neighborhoods in one city, and you specialize there and you're different and you're better and you win.
Sure.
But if you want to be global scale, it's hard to go into the game that's already global scale because the big sharks, you just have very little chance to beat them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what you want to do, and this is the hardest thing of all, and this is why the failure rates are so high, find a niche market where you can specialize that will blow up.
Well,
Now, the thing about predictions, and we can talk about prediction markets at some point, but is most of them don't turn out the way you think. So, people say I have a vision, and I often like to say it usually turns out to be hallucination. So it's
yeah,
just very difficult to identify those things. But in the ideal world, you're looking for them. I know for the business I'm trying to build, we're looking for them. Doesn't mean we'll ever find it, but we're trying to find that one thing where if we dominate it,
yeah.
get a really strong business model around it, and we scale it, you'll have a very profitable business.
Okay. Well, I think that was a very interesting deep dive into Five Guys, and it tied beautifully into Alexander the Great. So I appreciate that as always, Michael.
And then academia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I wrote down a number of things that we can explore on future episodes. So we hope you come back and join us for those conversations. If you wouldn't mind, leave us a like and give us a comment. Let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about. And you can also find us anywhere that podcasts are listened or found. We're on Apple Podcasts now. We're everywhere, Mike. It's fantastic.
We're everywhere.
Yeah.
That's all due to your work, your good work.
Trying to get us out there. So anyway, spread the word if you can. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here next week on Show Your Priors.